Herzlich willkommen zurück, meine Damen und Herren. Sie sind immer noch bei den Medientagen Mitteldeutschland live aus der Baumwollspinnerei in Leipzig. Wir haben jetzt ein Highlight für Sie zu bieten, nämlich Jeff Jarvis. Den Namen kennen Sie, der Mann ist bekannt, der war schon auf vielen Podien. Das ist einer der großen Welterklärer des modernen Mediensystems. Jeff ist Journalist, er ist Autor, er ist Redakteur, er ist Professor, er ist Lehrer, schreibt Bücher, er hat das große Buch geschrieben, was würde Google eigentlich machen. Einer, der nicht was mit Medien macht, sondern der alles mit Medien macht und der alles über Medien weiß. Ihn haben wir jetzt gleich hier als Keynoter auf unserer virtuellen Bühne. And I'll switch into English and I'm proud that I can present to you Jeff Jarvis, already now behind me. He will talk about the media system in the post-COVID time, in the post-Trump period, and in a new world we are facing now. Please, Jeff, it's up to you.
Vielen Dank. Es tut mir sehr leid, dass mein Deutsch immer noch so schlecht ist. Jeden Tag seit Januar habe ich Deutsch studiert mit Pimsler Audiokurs. Hoffnungslos. Vielleicht bin ich zu alt, vielleicht bin ich zu doof. So I'm always grateful to my German friends that you speak English far better than I will ever learn to speak German. I'm grateful to you for having me here today. I'm sorry that I'm not there with you. When we can travel again, I tell you the first place I want to go is Germany. I miss so many of my good friends there. This morning, I threw out the talk I was going to give, partly because my friend Sissy Pitzer told me that I'd better be provocative. But for another reason, I was inspired by Naomi Osaka at Roland Garros. You know, I cannot ever remember a quote from a sports or entertainment celebrity press conference that added value to society, that changed people's lives, that improved their communities. What Osaka revealed, I think, in backing out of the tournament because she didn't want to face the press, is the weakness in our institution of the story, our need to get quotes to fill those stories, to fill our pages. And of course, as you know well, the Relotius scandal at Der Spiegel did likewise. It exposed the seduction of the story, of our attention-based industry and business model, of our belief that we exist to manufacture a product that we call content. I don't think that's what journalism is about. Let us talk instead about value in journalism and the value of journalism. Journalism exists to provide a service to people's lives and communities. The last year has taught us that, I think, through all of our crises. Consider the lessons of COVID, of Black Lives Matter, and of Donald Trump and the AfD. In COVID, my greatest lesson has been the need for expertise. At the start of the pandemic, I curated a list on Twitter of 600 experts, epidemiologists, virologists, geneticists, biologists, frontline doctors, public health experts. And I learned a great deal from them, for I saw how these scientists and doctors adapted to the open information ecosystem that the net provides in ways that I would say is better than we have done in media in decades. Consider they used so-called preprint servers to share their papers immediately rather than waiting for them to be published because there was not time. They then used Twitter to peer review those papers. As silly as that might sound, I saw top experts in their fields immediately after papers were published, in hours, putting up their peer review of the points in the papers in the public for their peers and for all of us to see. It was quite remarkable. They also used social media to explain what was going on to the media and to us in the public. I think they provided a model for a next generation of journalism that is based on networks of expertise. And so the question becomes, how do we make that happen? How can we help build networks of expertise? I think we're so concerned these days with trying to bat down and kill disinformation and worry about the worst things that are going on the internet. We don't see the best things that are there. We don't see the experts who are there. How do we find and verify expertise? How do we give them a voice and give them an opportunity? How do we create these networks across other areas than just COVID? It enables us to consider expanding journalism immensely, rather than just trying to get quotes from the experts for our stories. Consider next the story of Black Lives Matter in the United States and the murder at the hands of police of George Floyd. Now, this is a story that has been going on in America, tragically, for generations. But we did not see it in mainstream mass media because, to be frank, mainstream mass media is run by people who look like me, old white men. So it wasn't part of our experience. And we in our newsrooms didn't have the representation and didn't give the respect to the lived experience of people to understand what was going on in their communities. We've had a debate in the US lately, again, about objectivity in journalism. I've had that debate since I was in college, but we have it in a new way. Wesley Lowery, a former Washington Post journalist who left because he debated with Marty Baron, the editor, about social media. Wesley Lowery wrote an op-ed in the New York Times some months ago, arguing that objectivity itself is an artifact of a white power structure. Because, again, it was people who looked like me who would decide what was objective and what was biased. And when journalists of color were told that their perspective was biased, they were told that we didn't value that perspective and that experience. And we then missed out on the most important story of the age. And so along came Black Lives Matter. And I believe that it has led to a racial reformation in America that has long been building. It wasn't just Twitter that did it. There are too many people who have suffered and died and struggled over generations to make this happen. But it's the internet that enabled this movement to instantly spread around the world. That is powerful. America's First Amendment protects not just the right to speak, but importantly, also the rights to assemble and to petition for redress of grievances. Black Lives Matter and social media gave full flower to the First Amendment in a way that I don't think the press ever fully has. Because social media, for all we criticize it, for all we complain about it, if we did not have Twitter and Facebook, we would not have seen the video of George Floyd's murder. If we did not have Twitter and we did not have Facebook, we would not have seen this movement rise up. Now, it's true, we are also seeing the counter-reformation, the far right, which I'll get to in a second. But if we walk away from the internet and social media, we walk away from those voices who for too long have not been heard. Now, of course, race is a core and key issue and problem in the United States. But I read a story in Die Zeit just last week about the need to discuss it in Germany as well. But this isn't just a story of race. It is a story of communities. And that can be built around race, gender, class, economics, ability. All these are the bases of communities. And so a key question for me in journalism is how do we in the future help communities to speak, assemble, and act? This takes me to the third lesson I think we've had in the last 4 years in the United States. And while I'm apologizing to you for my bad German, I'll also apologize to you for what America did to the world with Donald Trump for 4 years. And I think that has led in great measure to the problems that you have had around the AfD or the explosion of it. So I'm sorry for the lack of leadership we have shown in the world, and I'm grateful for Germany's leadership. In these last 4 horrible years of Trump, I have found it instructive to reread Hannah Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism, because I think it gives us lessons about how to interpret what is happening. When people tell us that they believe crazy QAnon theories about child molesters and pizza parlors, I don't believe they believe that. I think they want us to believe they believe it. It is performance. It is an effort to show off their affiliation and their anger and their fear. And every time that we take it seriously, we end up conspiring with them to spread their lies, their fear, and their hate. What do we do about this? How do we really get around this problem? I think we have to understand it differently. What's really happening in America right now, I believe, is that we are witnessing the last stand of the old white man. And again, I say that as one myself. But if you look at the far right and those in power in half of America, they would rather scorch the earth and tear down the institutions of democracy than share them with those who would follow. So what do we do again? Arendt teaches us, and I quote, "The chief characteristic of mass man is not brutality and backwardness, but his isolation and lack of normal social relationships." The problem is isolation, alienation, a lack of belonging. A few weeks ago, there was a very good story, and I think the New York Times or the Washington Post, that talked about just this, that the people who are involved in these so-called movements like QAnon don't belong. The people who went to the US Capitol on January 6th did it in great measure because they felt they belonged to something. What did they belong to? It didn't matter. And I think we make a mistake when we try to read too much into what is happening. So a very difficult question is, how do we help people gain a sense of belonging? Now, I don't mean that we all go out and hug a Donald Trump fan. I don't mean that we have to tolerate racism and fascism and hate. But instead, I think that we have to demonstrate to people that they have things in common. Instead, too often media, especially in the United States on television with Fox News, too often media value conflict. They value separation. They value trying to tear us apart. Hannah Arendt also said that in these movements, people give up their daily concerns for abstract concepts. So in the United States, people will fight over guns and abortion. And I don't believe those are the most important things in their lives. I think the most important things in their lives are the same things that are important in my life: my family, their well-being, our health, our ability to keep our jobs in this crisis. These are the things that hold us in common, that journalism should bring together and show us that we share. That's where the opportunity lies. Now, all of this, believe it or not, leads to a business strategy, one based on relationships and community. This is what I teach in the programs I've started at the City University of New York's Newmark Graduate School of Journalism. I started programs in engagement or social journalism, in entrepreneurial journalism, and in journalistic leadership. Now, the first skill that we teach there is listening. We're not good at it. Writing down quotes from a tennis star at Roland Garros in our notebooks and putting them in our stories, that's not listening. Listening means understanding communities' needs, reflecting those needs, and then working collaboratively to answer those needs. So I urge you to begin not with the idea of the public as a mass, but instead as a collection of communities where we try to build bridges among them, where we try to serve their needs. There's a wonderful service I love called I'm suddenly forgetting the name of it. I'll remember it in a second. But there's a service that brings together communities in conflict and tries to help them understand each other. You also look at what Die Zeit has done with Deutschland spricht, which I find really interesting, trying to bring together people, not to have them agree, but to have them understand. But consider these communities as the definitions the communities have of themselves. Yes, geography is one. The huge opportunity most of you have in this virtual room is to serve towns and villages and cities and neighborhoods. But communities have other definitions as well. I urge you not to use demographics. No one walks up on the street and says, "Hi, I'm a millennial." That is an external definition of a community. Consider instead definitions of communities where people share needs and affinities. People with diabetes, people caring for their elders, people with depression, people who love history. Listen to them, understand their needs, then invent new products and services to meet those needs. This, in my view, is a solution to the problem of privacy, of Datenschutz, coming after the death of the cookie. We have a desperate need for first-party data in our industry because third-party data and programmatic is going to go away in great measure because of the lobbying done in Germany. If we build services for, let's say, parents, and parents use that service, that is a way to learn about people in a permission-based system where I know you're a parent because I'm serving you as a parent. That is first-party data. That kind of community-based strategy can, I believe, lead to a new future. Now, oftentimes people say, when I argue this, they say, well, that doesn't scale. That doesn't get us a big enough audience. The skill scales. If we learn how to serve one community and the next community and the next community and the next community, it adds up to the whole, to a bigger whole. And this also leads to a business model built around membership versus subscription. Subscription is about buying this product we've called content, access to content. The problem with paywalls is that not everybody is worth paying for in the views of the marketplace. In the United States, according to the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, 63% of all subscriptions in the US for news go to three brands: New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. Everybody else shares the rest. So when every publication thinks that they're going to have this magical salvation from subscriptions, it's not going to work. Martin Nissenholtz, the former vice president of New York Times Digital, who started the paywall there, once spoke to my class, and he explained that the New York Times has this huge audience because it was free. It has a good conversion rate of 2 to 3% against that to paid. It has a high price because it's the New York Times. It has low churn because it is the New York Times. And so that's why it can work there, but it can't work everywhere. On the other hand, I see a lot of potential in membership as a model. Membership is not about buying content. Membership is about belonging to a community, sharing an affinity, sharing a need, working together toward a goal and supporting that work with time, effort, and yes, money. I think there are ways that we can help build the opportunities for communities to come together to do what they want to do and for people to belong to those communities, multiple communities. Look at what happens on Patreon, where people want to support work, or on Kickstarter, where they want to support work. I think we have this opportunity in our business as well. So a relationship-based, community-based strategy leads to various revenue streams. Also, commerce. We started a community of practice around commerce at my school. I had a center in entrepreneurial journalism. And there we brought together BuzzFeed and other companies that have done a very good job of selling products to the public based on specific interests and needs. Look at BuzzFeed's success with cooking. It's been amazing. Well, this convinced one major newspaper chain in the US to try commerce. And within less than a year before the COVID pandemic, they had a new $2 million revenue stream from selling things to the public. I don't mean mugs that have your brand on it. I mean things like BuzzFeed does. They sell pots and pans. If you know what people's interests and needs are, you can serve them and sell them directly, not just through advertising. Also, I think with the end of the pandemic, God willing, we'll see the return of events. I think virtual events like this have been very useful and have worked very well. I think in-person events as well will work well. And this is another definition of community. If people find something of interest they want to come out for, if they want to join in a conversation together, there's opportunity there. I think there's opportunity in education for us. For what are we, in a sense, but educators? And these days, we've got to teach people that they should get their vaccination, that it's safe and good for society. We are educators. And we can invent, I think, many other services if we see ourselves fundamentally as a service to people and their communities. We can rebuild our business and our revenue around that. So I urge you to think big. think past stories, past press conferences, past content, past even journalism and media. What interests me next is what I'm thinking of as internet studies. For in my mind, the internet is not a medium. The internet is not a subset of media. Instead, media have become a subset of the internet, along with so many other sectors of society. Communications is now entirely in the internet. The pandemic rushed the entry of education into the internet and into digital. Commerce also sped into the internet. Even restaurants and food spread into the internet. Finance is there. Politics is headed there. So much of society is now about being part of a connected world around those connections and around the data that occurs. So why shouldn't we think big and think not just about our publications and our old business model, but think bigger about how we can have a role in rethinking the internet? What does an internet look like that's based on expertise, community, relationships, and value? And rather than complaining about the internet as it was, how can we build a better internet and society? That's what I want to do next at my school. Let me end here talking about Gutenberg. I have used the pandemic and a sabbatical to finally finish a manuscript of a book that I've been working on and researching for some years on the end of the Gutenberg age, about how our transition as a society into the Gutenberg age teaches us lessons about our transition out of it into what follows. I'm still looking for a publisher. If you know anyone in Germany interested in it, let me know. But the primary lesson that I've learned in doing this research is that in this new age, it is still very much early days. It amazed me to realize that after the development of movable type in Mainz, it took 150 years before we got the first regularly published newspaper. Indeed, there was a rush of creativity with print that occurred around that same time, a century and a half later, with the development of the modern novel with Cervantes, the essay with Montaigne, a market for printed plays with Shakespeare. A huge growth of innovation occurred with print, because I think by then print had become boring. We didn't think about the technology anymore, but thought about what we could do with it. Well, how long is it going to take us to stop thinking of the internet as a technology, but instead merely as a tool to do what we want to do with it, that we have power over? It took, by the way, 250 years after Gutenberg before, of course, the business model truly emerged with copyright and the Statute of Anne in England. It took 350 years before there were the first advances in the technology of printing. And it amazes me that fundamentally printing stayed the same for that length of time until 1800, when we got steel presses, then steam-powered presses, then stereotyping, which was a huge saving, not having to reset type a letter at a time. And then right after that came, of course, wood pulp paper, leading to cheap paper and the mass and rolls of paper and faster presses and bigger newspapers, and the telegraph. And it was 450 years before we got to what I hope is the subject of my next book, the linotype, a magical machine that finally, for the first time in 450 years, ended the practice of setting type a letter at a time, leading to an explosion of media, an explosion of the mass and mass society. So now we come to a time where we look forward, I think, with that kind of lens, that we are at the bare beginning of this next era, the bare beginning of the internet. And it is up to us and up to you as an industry to be able to do more than just keep your newspaper afloat above the water, but instead to understand the core value of journalism so that we can reinvent not just journalism, but the internet and society with it. We are only about 25 years away from the introduction of the commercial web to society. In Gutenberg time, that puts us at 1475. Martin Luther was born in 1483. He didn't start the Reformation until 1517. Imagine if our Martin Luther hasn't been born yet. Or imagine if our Martin Luther indeed was the women who started Black Lives Matter. Imagine if that is the Reformation that begins to change society. And imagine what our role should be in that new society where communities too long not heard now can be heard. How do we help that happen? So thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate it, and I hope that next time I will see you in Leipzig. Tschüss.